What's going on? Slip is here with match 4 of our Esper Brain Control League. Trying to mess with my sound levels here. Again, my mic situation is less than optimal for the moment. Should be temporary. We see this hand on the play, which is just we cannot keep this. So we ship, and here we have Think Twice, Jar, Sram, Spell Snare. That seems fine. If Spell Snare is good, seems like we could pull something out here with a Scry. And we probably want to keep that land. So we play Colonnade. And Inspiring Vantage into Swift Spear means we're playing against Burn, probably. Not our best matchup. Hopefully we have something to Spell Snare here, like he plays an Eidolon. But he plays Lava Spike, so we're taking a bunch. Okay, gonna fetch a Swamp, I assume, and Think Twice. Once I tap correctly. Get a Snapcaster. A little dicey. I think about playing Jar here, but really we need to think twice again because we've got to draw something to get out of this. We're about to take 3, 5 potentially, counting Monastery Swift Spear, and then more. Because I'm sure opponent's gonna do something else. Here's a Lava Spike, down to 7. We're going to 4. Our opponent starts to cast something and then decides not to, which I find kind of suspect. So we can't tap out for Think Twice. Now we draw a Bet Call, so we could Srams into Bet Call, but then we're basically guaranteed to lose. So what we want to do is hope our opponent has a 2-drop in hand that would win the game, and then nothing else. We're going to wait for him to attack with Swift Spear. We're going to cast Snapcaster Mage so we can chump this, assuming he plays a spell. I mean, then it'll be a chump. And then, so he plays Lightning Helix, then we're going to snare that. Chump with Snap, and now we basically have to Srams into Bet Call because we have no counters. If we had a counter, we could hold that up and path the Swift Spear, but otherwise, do this, and we don't really draw anything. If we had drawn a Spell Snare here, maybe we could get out of it, but he plays the Boros Charm that we thought he had earlier, and we lose. Sideboarding. For sideboarding for this matchup, let's see if I can bring it up. There we go. So, Explosives is like kind of tempting, but at the same time, it's really like a turn 3 play if they see Jar. I guess he didn't see Jar that game, so we don't expect Destructive Revelry, although some Esper Drago decks play Leyline of Sanctity, which means that they might bring it in. Burn probably shouldn't be bringing cards like that in on hunches, but it's always possible. However, Explosives against the non-Nacatl version, which I'm assuming this is, we didn't really even see any green spells there, is probably not good. Likewise, Verdict, I'm not expecting enough threats that our 6 pieces of removal and the 2 Blessed Alliances we have after board are not going to be enough. So we bring in 1 Blessed Alliance and 2 Core Firewalker. We could bring in Ruined Halo, but I didn't. For those 3 cards, we just take out 3 Cryptics. And then we take out 2 Supreme Verdicts for a Dispel and a Negate to try to play the long game once we kind of stabilize a little bit. And the main thing we're going to have to contend with is the fact that our opponent's going to build cards up in his hand to try to get some flurry of spells off through our counters once we stabilize. Here we see Blessed Alliance, Core Firewalker, Blessed Alliance. What a great hand, but we can't keep it. Not even a single white source. On the play, if we had 1 white source, we could think about it, but not really. Here we see Spell Snare, Bet Call, Sram's Expertise. This is kind of suspect. It's kind of suspect, but at the same time, I'm going to keep it. We can path, the 1-drop creature and snare something else. When we see Blessed Alliance on top, we probably want to keep that. Which means I'm not going to play this Polluted Delta. I'm just going to play this tapped and take a hit from something if I have to. Opponent does not have a 1-drop creature. If our opponent plays Eidolon, we could probably snare it. In response to our fetch, our opponent thinks we're kind of tapped out counter-wise, and Lightning Helixes. Lightning Helix is kind of one of the weaker burn spells, especially at 2 mana, but I decided I kind of want to snare this anyway. We're not going to have a ton to do with our mana next turn, and I was thinking that if we draw a land, we could just go ahead and gain 4 and hold up Path to Exile, so that seems pretty good to me. Opponent plays Eidolon, which we could path here. We could. I think about it, and then I decide, okay, if we draw a land and we Srams into Beck, he can never attack with Eidolon again. We're at 23. We don't even get pinged by Eidolon, and we're probably going to be in pretty good shape, right? His burn spells are probably going to be hurting him enough with the 4 flyer damage that Eidolon isn't really working against us that much. If we don't draw something, I would rather just path the Eidolon on his turn anyway. I mean, if it's going to swing for 2, we'll definitely path it and get it off the board. However, I get punished immediately because we draw a Logic Knot, and because we can't Ghost Quarter one of these lands, since we need double white for expertise, we're not going to be able to path and Logic Knot this turn. So that's too bad. Instant punish. However, it is turn 4 and we're at 23 life, so that's pretty good. Path your Eidolon. Our opponent does something. Lava Spike. And we get an island. So we're kind of wondering what he's holding, if he didn't just unload that turn. Might be Searing Blazes, but I say we just play into him at this point. Boros Charm. So we draw a Jar, Srams, Beck Call, and we have a Logic Knot. So we're in a pretty good situation. We get blazed, we're at 11, we have a counter, and we draw a poor Firewalker. So we could Srams into Beck. That doesn't seem necessary to me, although with 2 cards in hand, our opponent isn't really going to be able to kill us. However, if we core Firewalker here, then our opponent's really not going to be able to kill us. So I decided to Walker, and then our other decision is, do we play Jar, and our opponent Atarkas commands in response, do we play Jar or do we counter? And I decide, for one thing, we don't really need to expose Jar to show our opponent that we're playing that kind of card. And for another thing, I don't really want to take 3 damage. So I'm just going to counter this. Our core Firewalker resolves, and we're going to be in pretty good shape. We're going to swing for 6, and we're gaining 1 every time somebody casts a red spell. We get to Srams into Beck next turn. I would consider this unlosable, right? I mean, our opponent has to like Skullcrack us to gain us 1 into like blaze this, so that's a net loss of 5 life, taking us to 5, and 2 cards just to get rid of a core Firewalker, and that would be the ideal draw. Seems pretty good. On to game 3. On the draw, we see this. Man, we're really drawing a lot of spell snares. I have no real problem with that. And this hand is kind of dicey, but also kind of enticing. So we have cheap answers to what our opponent's doing. And, you know, each, like, Dispel is kind of a gain 3 or 4, right? Spell Snare, kind of a gain 3 or 4. Fatal Push, good answer to something. Logic Knot, good answer to something. We have Think Twice. I decided this is worth keeping. If we can stall the game a little bit using answers, then we might be able to bounce back with the right combination of alliances and other cards. So our opponent Goblin Guides draws us a land, which is nice. I don't want to Colonnade here because we really want to be able to hold up Spell Snare for Eidolon. And I play Flooded Strand because I kind of suspect there's going to be a 2-drop. I would rather be able to counter Eidolon painlessly because this fetch needs to fetch a swamp for the push on the guide. I don't know if that's correct or not, but I decided to do it. So we just fetch an island here. We Spell Snare this. So we couldn't have done that if we played Delta because, I mean, I guess we could have. But since we're letting the guide hit us, I don't want to shock for a black source. So we're going to let the guide try to draw us 1 more land. And we have Dispel here. Best case scenario is obviously like our opponent Boros Charms to protect the guide, which just seems incredibly unlikely. That would be a terrible play, but we still have Dispel up. That's good. Okay. Still kind of waiting. Can think twice. I decided to not take this opportunity to get a Hallowed Fountain. Just hold up Dispel and try to draw into something better. Do that. Now we have Logic Knot up. Our opponent's on the Lava Spike U plan and holding up Instants. So holding up Dispel would let us cast Think Twice, but I decided we kind of want this white source now. We draw a Walker. It's going to be important. We draw Push, which could end up being good. And what we're suspecting, so we saw Searing Blaze last game. What we're starting to suspect is that our opponent is running a couple of copies of Searing, or is holding a couple of copies of Searing Blaze, and maybe something like a Tarka's Command, which they're saving to deal with a Blessed Alliance or something like that. I decide to Esper Charm our opponent here. We have a counter, and we get 2 Searing Blazes, so that's great. We are going to need to play creatures at some point. Opponent plays Lightning Helix, which we're not going to counter. We draw Beck Call, which is not great yet. Now, given our counter situation, we could theoretically Snapcaster Esper Charm. That's a thing we could do. But since we draw another Esper Charm, I decide to do this instead. I'm kind of suspicious that our opponent's overloaded on Searing Blazes at this point, so going Snap Esper Charm would actually be counterproductive as far as that goes. Opponent shocks. We're just going to Dispel a Tarka's Command and hopefully leave our opponent hellbent, but we don't. However, if we counter this with Spell Snare, our opponent doesn't have 2 mana open to Searing Blaze, and that was indeed the last card they had. So at this point, we get to fire up Colonnade and hold up Logic Knot. Our opponent has 1 spell in hand, which cannot kill us. So we get 1 turn of Colonnading. Our opponent plays an Atarka's Command, which I'm going to probably counter. If we don't counter that, it lets our opponent just not play anything, right? If we try to counter the second burn spell, it lets our opponent not play anything and then try to overload us next turn. So since we only have 1 Logic Knot left, I decided to fire up Colonnade here. Swing for 6. And we have our opponent dead next turn and doesn't draw anything. Not sure what our opponent was holding, but we could have countered one of the spells, so we would have lived, basically, right? Our opponent plays Boros Charm. We live. Our opponent's Searing Blazes are our Snapcaster Mage. We counter it, and then we still live, and then we... or we don't counter it, like plays, say, Boros Charm first, we counter that, Searing Blazes this, we still win through Colonnade Beats. So that was good, taking down Burn 2-1. We are 4-0, on to the 5th match.